The emergency sirens tore through Zenith Prime Station at exactly 0400 hours, jolting everyone from sleep. Rachel Foster had been a security captain for Earth's delegation for 3 years now, but she'd never heard that particular alarm before. It was the kind of sound that made your blood run cold, the kind reserved for diplomatic catastrophes. She threw on her uniform and sprinted toward the command center, her boots echoing through the metal corridors. Other humans were stumbling out of their quarters too, confused and worried. Through the windows she could see alien species doing the same, Thorians with their crystalline skin catching the emergency lights, small Pixith darting through the air on gossamer wings, even the usually calm Valorians moving with unusual urgency. The command center was pure chaos when Rachel arrived. Screens flashed red warnings, translators struggled to keep up with a dozen species all shouting at once, and in the center of it all stood High Matron Thesiva. The Drachmer leader was 12 feet tall, covered in deep purple scales that shimmered like oil on water, and right now she looked absolutely terrifying. Her tail was lashing back and forth, smashing against the floor with each swing, a sign of extreme distress in her species. Gone. All of them gone. Thesiva's voice boomed through the chamber and Rachel felt it vibrate in her chest. My children, my precious hatchlings. Rachel's stomach dropped. Everyone on the station knew about the Drachmer hatchlings. They'd been the talk of Zenith Prime for months. 6 royal babies, born to Thesiva's bloodline, destined to become leaders and bond with the champions of allied species. The nursery had been under constant guard, protected by the best security systems in 3 sectors. How could they just disappear? She pushed through the crowd to get closer. The head of station security, a 4-armed Keldan named Brix, was pulling up security footage on the main screens. The nursery was sealed from the inside, he explained, his translator making his clicking language sound mechanical. No breach detected. No unauthorized entries. At 0347 hours, there was a brief power fluctuation across several decks. When power returned 17 seconds later, the hatchlings were gone. 17 seconds? Rachel repeated. That's impossible. No one could grab 6 hatchlings and disappear in 17 seconds. Nevertheless, they did. Brix's 4 eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The power fluctuation originated in the human sector. Maintenance level 7. The room went quiet. Every alien eye turned toward Rachel and the handful of other humans present. She felt the weight of their suspicion like a physical thing pressing down on her shoulders. Ambassador Kravath of the Thorian Empire stepped forward, his crystalline body refracting the emergency lights into rainbow patterns across the walls. His species had never fully trusted humans, thought they were too unpredictable, too emotional, too young to be part of the galactic community. How very convenient, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Humans experience technical difficulties, and simultaneously the most valuable beings on this station vanish without a trace. We didn't do this, Rachel said firmly, but even she could hear how defensive it sounded. Of course you would say that, another voice called out. It was Counselor Vix, a manther whose species had competed with humans for trading rights in the outer colonies. Your kind has been looking for ways to gain leverage since you joined the council. That's ridiculous, Rachel shot back. We have nothing to gain from stealing hatchlings. We'd lose everything, our seat on the council, our trade agreements, our allies. Unless you plan to ransom them, Vix suggested coldly. Thesiva's roar silenced everyone. It was a sound of pure anguish, the cry of a mother who'd lost her children. When she spoke again, her voice was barely controlled rage. I do not care about your politics or your suspicions. I want my hatchlings found. Now. The Galactic Council convened within the hour. Rachel stood before them in the Grand Chamber, a space designed to hold representatives from hundreds of worlds. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, and the curved walls displayed the stars beyond, a reminder that they were all just specks floating in the vastness of space. Right now Rachel felt smaller than ever. Captain Foster, the council arbiter began, his ancient voice translated into a dozen languages simultaneously. Humanity stands accused of involvement in the disappearance of the royal Drachmer hatchlings. What say you? We're innocent, Rachel stated clearly. And we'll prove it. I just need time to investigate. Thesiva leaned forward from her elevated seat, her massive form casting a shadow over Rachel. Time? My children could be suffering. They could be cold, frightened, alone. Which is why I need to find them quickly, Rachel pressed. 72 hours. Give me 3 days to conduct a proper investigation. The council members murmured among themselves. Finally the arbiter spoke. You have 72 hours, Captain Foster. If the hatchlings are not found or if any evidence points to human involvement, Earth's membership in this council will be revoked. Your species will be barred from galactic space. Do you understand? Rachel's mouth went dry, but she nodded. Understood. As she left the chamber, she heard Kravatha's voice echo behind her. 72 hours until humanity shows its true colors. Rachel had 3 days to save not just 6 missing hatchlings, but Earth's entire future among the stars. She headed straight for maintenance level 7, knowing that whatever answers existed, they started with that power fluctuation in the human sector. She just hoped those answers wouldn't destroy everything humanity had worked for. Rachel descended into the maintenance levels with growing frustration. She'd been searching for 12 hours straight, interviewing every human who'd been on duty during the power surge, checking and rechecking security logs that showed absolutely nothing useful. The deeper she went into the station's guts, the hotter and more cramped it became. These levels weren't designed for comfort. They were pure function, all exposed pipes and humming machinery. Maintenance level 7 was a maze of narrow corridors and junction rooms filled with equipment most people never thought about. The air recyclers that kept everyone breathing, the gravity generators that kept their feet on the floor, the power conduits that kept the lights on. It was the kind of place you only noticed when something went wrong, and right now, everything had gone very wrong indeed. She found him in junction room 7B, wedged halfway inside an open panel with his legs sticking out. Sparks flew from somewhere inside the wall, followed by some creative cursing that made Rachel raise an eyebrow. A moment later, Tom Bennett wriggled back out, his face smudged with grease and his brown hair sticking up at odd angles. "Hand me the plasma torch, would you?" he said without looking, assuming she was another maintenance worker. "I'm not here to help with repairs," Rachel said. Tom looked up, startled, and banged his head on the panel edge. "Damn it." He rubbed his head and squinted at her uniform. "Captain Foster? What brings security down to the fun levels?" Rachel studied him carefully. Tom Bennett, 32 years old, been working maintenance on Zenith Prime for 18 months. His file said he'd barely passed his certification exams but had a reputation for fixing things other people had given up on. He worked double shifts regularly, lived alone, kept to himself mostly. Nothing in his background suggested he'd steal alien royalty. "I need to ask you about the power surge 3 weeks ago." Tom's expression didn't change, but Rachel noticed his hand tighten slightly on the wrench he was holding. "Already told station ops everything. I was rerouting power from the secondary grid to keep life support running in sections 12 through 18. Standard emergency protocol. Walk me through it again." Tom sighed and set down his tools. "Fine. Around 0330 hours, I got an alert that the primary power coupling was failing. If I hadn't switched to secondary, half the residential sections would have lost air circulation. So I came down here, did the reroute, power flickered for maybe 20 seconds total, then everything stabilized. That's it. And you didn't see anything unusual? Hear anything? In maintenance tunnels at 3 in the morning? Just the usual creaks and groans of a station this size." Tom picked up a rag and wiped his hands, but Rachel noticed he wasn't making eye contact anymore. "What? What's this about?" "The Drakmar hatchlings went missing during that power surge." Tom's hand stopped moving. "The dragon babies? Everyone's been talking about that. They really think someone down here had something to do with it?" "The power surge originated in this section. You were the only person here. I was fixing a power failure, not kidnapping aliens." Tom's voice had an edge to it now. "Look, Captain, I'm good at my job, but I'm not some kind of master thief. I wouldn't even know how to get into the diplomatic levels, let alone past all that security." Rachel believed him, actually. He seemed genuinely confused and a little offended. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Where have you been sleeping lately?" Tom's face went carefully blank. "My quarters." "Why?" "Station logs show you haven't entered your quarters in 3 weeks. Not once. The lock's been sticking. I've been meaning to fix it." "You're a mechanic. It would take you 5 minutes." "I've been busy." Rachel stepped closer. "Tom, I've got 72 hours to find those hatchlings or Earth loses its seat on the council. I don't have time for whatever privacy concerns you've got. If you know something, anything, you need to tell me now." Tom looked at her for a long moment and she could see him wrestling with something. Finally he shook his head. "I can't help you." "Can't or won't? Does it matter?" Rachel felt her patience snap. "Yes, it matters. Do you understand what's at stake here? It's not just politics. If we can't find those hatchlings, humans will be banned from galactic space. Every human on every colony world, Every ship, every station, all of it gone. Billions of lives affected because someone decided to keep secrets. Tom's jaw tightened. I'm not keeping secrets. He stopped, rubbed his face with both hands. Look, I've got a personal situation going on, okay? Nothing to do with missing hatchlings or diplomatic incidents. Just personal stuff that's nobody's business but mine. I'm making it my business. You can't. I can have you detained for obstruction of a council investigation. The color drained from Tom's face. You wouldn't. Try me. I've got 48 hours left and 0 leads. You're acting suspicious, you're sleeping in your workshop instead of your quarters, and you were in the exact location where everything went wrong. So either you tell me what you're hiding, or I haul you to a detention cell and search every centimeter of this level. Tom stared at her, and for a moment Rachel thought he was going to call her bluff. Then his shoulders sagged. If I show you, you have to promise you'll understand. I was trying to help. I didn't know what else to do. Show me what? Tom didn't answer. He just grabbed a flashlight and headed deeper into the maintenance corridors. Rachel followed, her hand instinctively moving closer to her sidearm. They walked for 5 minutes, taking turns she'd never noticed before, until Tom stopped in front of what looked like a solid wall. This corridor isn't on the station maps, Rachel said. Yeah, well, stations this old have lots of spaces that aren't on maps anymore. Sealed off, forgotten about. Tom pressed his palm against a specific spot on the wall, and a section slid open, clearly rigged with some kind of jury-rigged sensor. I found this place my first week here. Been using it for storage mostly. Warm air wafted out from the opening, and Rachel heard something that made her freeze. Soft chirping sounds like birds but deeper, more musical. Tom stepped through the opening and she followed, her heart pounding. The hidden room was maybe 20 feet square, filled with thermal blankets and heat lamps. And there, nestled together in what looked like a nest made of insulation material and spare clothes, were 6 small dragons. The moment Tom entered, they exploded into motion. All 6 hatchlings swarmed toward him, climbing up his legs with tiny claws, chirping excitedly, their scales shimmering in shades of purple and silver and gold. They piled onto him like he was home, settling on his shoulders and chest and arms, one even curling around the back of his neck like a living scarf. Rachel stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The galaxy's most wanted missing creatures, the cause of an interstellar incident that could end humanity's place in the stars, were treating a maintenance worker like he was their long-lost parent. Tom looked at her with exhausted, worried eyes. So yeah, this is my personal situation. Rachel couldn't move. Her brain had completely short-circuited. The 6 most sought-after creatures in 3 sectors were currently competing for space on Tom Bennett's shoulders like puppies fighting for attention. One of them, the smallest with silver-tipped scales, had its tiny snout buried against Tom's neck, making a sound that could only be described as purring. I can explain, Tom said quickly, though he was absently scratching one hatchling behind its ear ridges in a way that suggested he'd done it 1,000 times before. They? Rachel couldn't form a complete sentence. Tom, do you have any idea what you've done? Helped. Tom offered weakly. The hatchlings chirped at Rachel's raised voice, and he immediately lowered his tone to soothe them. It's okay, she's not mad at you. She's mad at me. Mad doesn't even begin to cover it. Rachel wanted to shout, but the hatchlings were already looking nervous, so she forced herself to speak quietly. The entire galaxy thinks humans kidnapped them. We're about to be kicked out of the council. There are species calling for sanctions, blockades, and you've had them here the whole time. I didn't kidnap anyone. Tom protested. Look, just let me explain what actually happened, okay? Rachel crossed her arms and waited, trying to ignore how the hatchlings kept peeking at her with curious, intelligent eyes that seemed far too aware for babies. Tom took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, during that power surge, I was down in the junction room like I said. Everything was going fine, routine emergency procedure. Then I heard this scratching sound coming from the ventilation shaft. Thought maybe some debris got loose, right? But it kept getting louder, and then I heard this tiny squeaking sound. He shifted his weight, and all 6 hatchlings adjusted themselves automatically to stay balanced on him. It was weirdly coordinated like they'd practiced. So I opened the vent panel and there they were. 6 scared little creatures huddled together in the shaft, shaking and making these distressed noises. They were freezing. The environmental controls in the vents were malfunctioning from the power surge. I had no idea they were the royal hatchlings. I mean, look at them, they're tiny. I thought maybe they were someone's escaped pets or something. You thought someone was keeping dragons as pets? Rachel asked incredulously. Have you seen some of the stuff aliens bring onto this station? Last month the Keldon had a creature that was literally made of living electricity. I've learned not to question anything anymore. Tom gently repositioned a hatchling that was starting to slide off his shoulder. Point is, they were cold and scared and clearly lost. So I brought them here, got them warmed up, found some food. What are you feeding them? Mostly protein paste from the commissary, some dried meat, bits of fruit. They're not picky. Tom looked defensive. I researched it. The station database had basic info about Drachmer dietary needs. I've been doing my best. Rachel pinched the bridge of her nose. Okay. So you found them, you helped them. Why didn't you report it? I was going to. That first day, I was planning to take them to security as soon as my shift ended. But then. Tom trailed off, looking down at the hatchlings with something like wonder in his eyes. They wouldn't leave. Every time I tried to put them down, they'd cry and cling to me. And the more time I spent with them, the more attached they got. By the time I realized these were the hatchlings everyone was looking for, it had been 3 days and they were acting like I was their parent. You should have come forward immediately. I know. But I kept thinking maybe I could figure out a way to return them without it being this whole thing. And the longer I waited, the harder it got to admit what I'd done, or not done, I guess. Plus they were happy and healthy and safe. I convinced myself a few more days wouldn't hurt while I figured out the right approach. One of the hatchlings yawned, showing rows of tiny sharp teeth, and curled up tighter against Tom's chest. Rachel felt her anger warring with the surreal cuteness of the scene. Tom, we need to return them. No. High Matron Thasiva is losing her mind up there. I know. I'll take them back right now. Tom started to reach for the smallest hatchling, the one with the silver-tipped scales. The moment his hands moved toward it, the little dragon let out a shriek that made Rachel's ears ring. The other 5 immediately joined in, their cries echoing off the metal walls. They dug their tiny claws into Tom's jumpsuit and skin, holding on like their lives depended on it. Hey, it's okay. Tom abandoned the attempt immediately, and the hatchlings quieted down to whimpers. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. You're okay. Rachel stared at the scene with growing dread. She'd seen bonding behavior before. Most spacefaring species had some version of it. Young creatures imprinting on caregivers, forming attachments that were psychological, sometimes even biochemical. Tom, tell me you didn't let them bond to you. I didn't let them do anything. It just happened. Tom looked genuinely distressed now. I didn't know Drachmer hatchlings imprinted. I mean, I'd heard the term, but I thought it was like a formal ceremony or something, not an automatic thing. With Drachmer, it's automatic and irreversible, Rachel said, her stomach sinking. They imprint on whoever provides warmth and protection in their first weeks of life. It's biological, hardwired into their species. These hatchlings think you're their parent now. Tom's face went pale. That's bad, isn't it? Bad? Tom, these are royal hatchlings. They were supposed to bond with carefully selected leaders from allied species. Warriors, diplomats, people chosen through centuries of genetic matching and political negotiation. You've disrupted plans that have been in the works since before these eggs were even laid. I was just trying to help, Tom said quietly. The hatchlings sensed his distress and started nuzzling against him, making soothing chirping sounds. Even in her panic, Rachel noticed they were trying to comfort him the same way he'd comforted them. We need to contact the Thasiva, Rachel said, already pulling out her communicator. Maybe there's a way to transfer the bond or... There isn't. Both Rachel and Tom jumped. High Matron Thasiva stood in the hidden doorway, having moved with impossible silence for a creature her size. Behind her, 3 more Drachmer warriors filled the corridor, their scales gleaming in the artificial light. Rachel had no idea how long she'd been listening, but the expression on Thasiva's face suggested it had been long enough. The matron's eyes were locked on the 6 hatchlings clinging to Tom Bennett like he was the center of their universe. My children, Thasiva whispered, and Rachel heard a world of emotion in those 2 words. Relief, joy, confusion, and underneath it all, a growing horror as she recognized what had happened. Tom stood frozen as Thasiva approached, the hatchlings chirping nervously but not leaving their perch. The great Drachmer matron stopped 3 feet away, close enough to touch her babies but not reaching out, and Rachel saw something she'd never expected to see in an alien species so different from humanity. Thasiva was crying. Thick, shimmering tears rolled down her scaled face as she stared at the hatchlings, safe, healthy, and bonded to completely the wrong person. When she finally spoke, her voice shook with barely controlled rage. You have taken my children's destiny and replaced it with this. She gestured at Tom's greasy jumpsuit, his cluttered workshop visible through the doorway. They were meant for greatness. And now they belonged to a mechanic. The council chamber was packed. Rachel had never seen it this crowded. Representatives from species she didn't even recognize had shown up to witness what everyone was calling the trial of the century. Tom stood in the center of the circular floor, 6 hatchlings refusing to leave his shoulders despite repeated attempts to remove them. He looked absolutely terrified, and Rachel couldn't blame him. Above him, arranged in curved tiers that rose toward the domed ceiling, sat the most powerful beings in known space, and most of them looked ready to see him fail. High Matron Thasiva occupied the largest seat, her massive form radiating controlled fury. She'd spent the past 2 days trying everything to separate the hatchlings from Tom. Bribes of their favorite foods. Toys designed specifically for young Drachmer. Even bringing in other members of her species to call to them. Nothing worked. The moment Tom was out of sight, the hatchlings became hysterical, their cries echoing through the station until he was brought back. The Arbiter's ancient voice filled the chamber. "We are gathered to witness a trial of worth, invoked under the ancient laws of the Drachmer people. Tom Bennett, human, has bonded with 6 royal hatchlings through circumstance rather than design. High Matron Thasiva challenges this bond and demands he prove himself worthy of the honor thrust upon him." Tom swallowed hard. Rachel caught his eye from where she stood with the other human observers and tried to give him an encouraging nod. It didn't seem to help much. "The trial consists of 3 tests," Thasiva announced, standing to her full impressive height. "Combat prowess, strategic thinking, and spiritual worthiness. Should he fail any test, the bond will be ritually severed. The hatchlings will undergo treatment to forget him, and he will never see them again." Rachel saw Tom's hand unconsciously move to touch the smallest hatchling, the one with silver-tipped scales that had claimed the spot on his shoulder as its permanent home. The idea of these babies being made to forget him clearly hurt worse than any punishment they could inflict on him directly. "I'll do whatever it takes," Tom said, his voice steadier than Rachel expected. "I'm not giving them up." The first trial was held in the station's training arena. Tom was given basic protective gear and a staff. Traditional Drachmer weapons were too large for human hands. His opponent was Kthara, a young Drachmer warrior who was apparently going easy on him by Drachmer standards. She was still 9 feet tall and covered in battle scars. Rachel watched from the observation deck as Tom tried his best. He really did. He'd clearly watched some training videos in the past 2 days, knew the basic defensive positions. But knowing and doing were very different things. Kthara moved with fluid grace, her tail whipping around to sweep Tom's legs out from under him before he even saw it coming. He hit the ground hard, the air whooshing out of his lungs. The hatchlings, secured in a transparent enclosure near the arena floor, went absolutely berserk. Their cries were deafening, and they threw themselves against the walls trying to get to Tom. He struggled to his feet, clearly shaken, and Kthara pressed her advantage. 3 more strikes, each one Tom failed to block properly, and he was flat on his back again. Kthara's staff pointed at his throat. "Yield," she said not unkindly. Tom yielded. The match had lasted less than a minute. As medical staff checked him for injuries, nothing serious, just bruises and wounded pride, Rachel saw the satisfaction on Ambassador Kravatha's crystalline face. This was going exactly as the anti-human faction had hoped. The second trial was held in a strategy room, Tom seated at a holographic display showing a complex military scenario. A fleet of hostile ships approaching a colony world, limited resources, civilian populations to evacuate. The kind of problem that military academies used to test their best students. Rachel watched Tom stare at the display, clearly overwhelmed. He understood how to fix a power conduit or jury-rig a life support system, but military tactics might as well have been ancient magic. He made his first move, sending ships to intercept the enemy fleet, and the simulation immediately showed it was wrong. He'd left the colony's western approach completely undefended. Tom tried to correct it, but each move he made revealed more gaps in his knowledge. He didn't know proper formation protocols. He couldn't calculate jump coordinates under pressure. He sent supply ships directly into combat zones by accident. The council members watching didn't even bother hiding their disappointment. Even some of the humans in the gallery looked embarrassed. After 30 minutes of watching Tom struggle, the test administrator mercifully ended it. "Insufficient," was the only word he used. Tom just nodded, looking defeated. That night, Rachel found him back in his hidden workshop, sitting on the floor with all 6 hatchlings piled on and around him. He was absently running his fingers over their scales while they slept, his face showing a level of exhaustion that went beyond physical. "I'm going to lose them," he said quietly when Rachel sat down beside him. Tomorrow's the last trial and I'm going to fail that too. I don't know anything about Drachmer spirituality or meditation or whatever they're going to test me on. I'm just a mechanic who fixes things. You saved their lives, Rachel reminded him. That's not enough. Not for them. Tom gestured vaguely upward, toward where the council sat in judgment. The Sci-Fi was right. These babies were meant for greatness, for warriors and leaders and champions. Instead they got stuck with me and now they're going to be made to forget I ever existed. The smallest hatchling, the silver-tipped one Tom had privately started calling Spark, stirred in his lap. It opened one sleepy eye, saw Tom's distressed expression, and made a soft questioning chirp. Tom immediately smoothed his face and whispered, "It's okay, I'm fine. Go back to sleep." Spark didn't believe him. The little dragon crawled up Tom's chest to his shoulder and started nuzzling against his neck, making those comforting purring sounds. One by one the other hatchlings woke up and joined in, responding to Tom's emotional state even in their sleep. Within moments, all 6 were actively trying to make him feel better, chirping and nuzzling and even bringing him tools from his workbench like gifts. Rachel watched this scene and felt something click in her mind. Tom, why did they bond to you? Because I was there when they needed help? No, I mean specifically, what about you made them choose you over anyone else they might have encountered? Tom looked down at the hatchlings now playing with a wrench they dragged over. I don't know. I figured out what they needed and gave it to them. They were cold so I found heat lamps. They were scared so I stayed with them. They were hungry so I researched what they could eat and got it for them. It's just problem solving. Exactly, Rachel said, an idea forming. You're good at figuring things out, at adapting, at finding solutions nobody else sees. That's not weakness, Tom. That's a completely different kind of strength. Tom didn't look convinced, but something was nagging at Rachel's thoughts. She looked around the workshop, at the improvised tools, the creative fixes that made proper engineers cringe, the diagrams on the walls showing how Tom had been teaching the hatchlings about simple machines and basic physics. Maybe they'd been approaching this trial all wrong. The Drachmer were testing Tom by their standards, warrior skills, traditional tactics, ancient rituals. But the hatchlings hadn't chosen a Drachmer warrior. They'd chosen a human mechanic. Maybe that meant something. The final trial was set to begin at noon. Tom barely slept, spending most of the night reading everything he could find about Drachmer spiritual practices. Ancient meditation techniques, connection to ancestral wisdom, rituals involving crystals and incense and chanting in languages he couldn't pronounce. By dawn he was more confused than when he'd started. Rachel found him pacing in his workshop an hour before the trial, the hatchlings sensing his anxiety and chirping nervously from their nest. I can't do this, he said, running his hands through his already messy hair. I've been reading about their spiritual practices all night and I understand maybe 10% of it. How am I supposed to connect with ancestral Drachmer wisdom when I can barely understand the instruction manual? Maybe you're not supposed to, Rachel said carefully. She'd been thinking about this all night too. Tom, what if we've been looking at this wrong the whole time? What do you mean? The council keeps testing you on Drachmer values, combat, military strategy, their spiritual traditions. But you're not Drachmer. You're human. And those hatchlings chose a human for a reason. Tom stopped pacing. I'm not following. Rachel picked up one of the toys Tom had made from spare parts. A simple puzzle that taught the hatchlings about gears and movement. You've been teaching them, haven't you? These past 3 weeks. I mean, yeah, kind of. They're curious about everything so I just show them stuff while I work. Basic engineering concepts, how things fit together, problem solving. Tom shrugged like it was nothing. Keeps them entertained. What if that's the point? Rachel's excitement was growing. What if they didn't bond to you by accident? What if they sensed something in you that they needed, something they wouldn't get from a traditional Drachmer warrior? Tom looked at the hatchlings now playing with a pulley system he'd rigged up for them. Spark, the smallest, had just figured out that pulling one rope made a bell ring on the other side, and was chirping triumphantly. You think I should, what? Show the council my workshop? I think you should show them what spiritual worthiness means to a human. The council chamber was silent when Tom walked in with Rachel at his side. The Sci-Fi sat forward in her seat, clearly expecting this to be over quickly. Tom Bennett would fail to meditate properly, fail to connect with Drachmer ancestral spirits, and the hatchlings would be freed from their inappropriate bond. Hi Matron, Tom began, his voice surprisingly steady. I've spent the past day studying your spiritual practices and I'm going to be honest, I don't fully understand them. Your people have thousands of years of tradition that I can't hope to master in a few hours. The Sci-Fi's expression hardened. Then you admit defeat. No, Tom said firmly. I'm asking for a modification to the trial. Let me show you what spiritual worthiness means in human terms. If you still find me unworthy after that, I'll accept your judgment. The council members murmured among themselves. It was an unusual request, but not technically against the rules. The arbiter consulted briefly with his advisors, then nodded. You may proceed. Tom took a deep breath. I need everyone to follow me. It's not far. The procession through the maintenance corridors was surreal. Council members in formal robes ducking through low doorways, their fine clothes brushing against greasy pipes. Ambassador Kravoth actually got his crystalline shoulders stuck in a tight passage and had to be carefully extracted. The Sci-Fi had to turn sideways in some sections, her massive frame barely fitting. They arrived at Tom's workshop to find it exactly as he'd left it. Chaotic, messy, covered in half-finished projects and improvised tools. Rachel saw several council members wrinkle their noses or whatever passed for noses in their species. This was not the dignified setting they'd expected for a spiritual trial. Tom opened the hatchlings' enclosure, and they immediately swarmed to him, chirping happily. He let them settle on his shoulders and arms, then turned to address the assembled council. For the past 3 weeks, while everyone thought these hatchlings were missing, I've been teaching them. Not on purpose at first, I just needed them entertained while I worked. But it became something more. He walked to a section of the wall covered in crude diagrams. This is how a power conduit works. These are basic mechanical principles. Levers, pulleys, gears. This one's about how the station's air recyclers filter oxygen from carbon dioxide. He pointed to a series of increasingly complex drawings. I've been breaking down how things work into simple pieces they can understand. You teach royal hatchlings to be mechanics? The Sci-Fi's voice dripped with disdain. I teach them to think, Tom corrected. He gestured to several puzzle stations set up around the workshop. Watch. He released the hatchlings and they scattered to different projects. Spark immediately went to the gear puzzle, the one Tom had been working on with her yesterday. She'd gotten stuck on it then, frustrated when the pieces wouldn't fit the way she expected. Now, Rachel watched as the little dragon tried a different approach, testing each gear, seeing how they connected, working through the problem methodically. Another hatchling, the largest one with deep purple scales, was tackling a sorting game. Different colored blocks had to go through different shaped holes. Yesterday he tried to force them. Today he was testing each block carefully, learning from each failed attempt. They're learning to fail, Tom explained quietly. In Drakmar culture, failure brings shame, right? Warriors are expected to succeed or die trying. But these little ones are learning that failure is just information. It tells you what doesn't work so you can try something else. The Sci-Fi stood abruptly. You teach my children to accept defeat? I teach them that defeat and failure aren't the same thing, Tom said, meeting her eyes. Defeat is when you stop trying. Failure is just a step toward figuring it out. Watch Spark. The smallest hatchling had just solved the gear puzzle. Her triumphant chirp filled the workshop, and the other hatchlings immediately abandoned their projects to see what she'd accomplished. Spark demonstrated proudly, showing them how the gears connected. She'd failed at this puzzle a dozen times over the past week, but she'd kept trying different approaches until something worked. They're teaching each other, Rachel breathed, seeing it clearly now. The hatchlings weren't just learning from Tom, they were learning to share knowledge, to collaborate, to build on each other's discoveries. Your people value strength and tradition, Tom said, turning back to the Sci-Fi. And those are important things. But the galaxy is changing. There are problems coming that can't be solved with warrior skills alone. These hatchlings, your children, they sense that somehow. They chose me not because I'm strong or strategic or spiritually enlightened. They chose me because I'm good at figuring things out, even when I don't know the answer at first. He knelt down and all 6 hatchlings rushed back to him, climbing over each other to reach him. I've been teaching them to ask questions, to experiment, to look at problems from different angles. To not be afraid of being wrong because being wrong is how you learn to be right. The workshop fell silent except for the soft chirping of the hatchlings. Rachel looked around at the council members' faces, trying to gauge their reactions. Ambassador Kravoth looked thoughtful, his earlier hostility faded. Even the arbiter was leaning forward with interest. The Sci-Fi slowly descended from her elevated position. She walked through the workshop, examining the teaching tools Tom had created from spare parts. She stopped at the diagrams on the walls, complex station systems broken down into simple, understandable pieces. Her massive hand traced over a drawing showing how the gravity generators worked. You make the complicated simple, she said finally. That's kind of my job, Tom admitted. Can't fix something if you don't understand it first. The Sci-Fi turned to face him fully. For a long moment, she just stared at him and the hatchlings clinging to his shoulders. Spark chose that moment to chirp and show the Sci-Fi the gear puzzle she'd solved, clearly proud and wanting to share her accomplishment with her biological mother. Something shifted in the Sci-Fi's expression. They are different than they should be. Yeah, Tom said softly. I'm sorry about that. They think like humans now. A little bit, maybe. They're still Drachmer, still yours. They're just learning to solve problems in addition to everything else they'll learn. The Sci-Fi was quiet for a long time. Rachel held her breath, watching the massive alien matriarch wrestle with something that went against everything her culture valued. Finally, the Sci-Fi made a sound, a strange grinding noise that Rachel realized after a moment was laughter. The galaxy will think I have gone mad, the Sci-Fi said, but there was warmth in her voice now. Royal Drachmer hatchlings learning from a mechanic. Being taught to accept failure. Playing with toys made from garbage. She looked at her children again, really looked at them and saw how engaged they were, how curious, how eager to learn. But perhaps mad is what we need. She turned to address the council. I accept this bond. These hatchlings will grow learning both Drachmer strength and human creativity. She said the word like she wasn't entirely sure what it meant but was willing to find out. The council chamber erupted in debate, but the arbiter's decision was final. Tom Bennett, maintenance mechanic, was granted diplomatic status as guardian to 6 Royal Drachmer hatchlings. As the council members filed out, still arguing, Rachel saw Tom sink to the floor in relief, all 6 dragons piling on top of him in celebration. You did it, Rachel said, grinning. We did it, Tom corrected. Then he looked down at Spark, who was already tugging at his tool belt, ready for the next lesson. Now I just have to figure out how to raise 6 dragon babies who are going to grow up to be galactic leaders. No pressure. Rachel laughed. Humanity had just secured its place in the galactic community not by being the strongest or the most advanced, but by being exactly what they'd always been. Adaptable, creative, and too stubborn to accept that any problem couldn't be solved. And somewhere in the universe, 6 little dragons were learning that lesson too, one gear puzzle at a time.